The morning sun slipped gently through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow over the modest kitchen. The smell of pancakes and brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the sound of children whispering and giggling as they carried a tray down the hall. It was Mother's Day, Sarah Whitaker's 10th as a single mother. She smiled as her daughter, Ellie, and son, Jonah, burst through the bedroom door with a homemade breakfast and glitter-covered cards. Their eyes sparkled with pride. To them, she was their whole world. And they were hers. No one knew what Sarah had endured to get here. 10 years ago, she stood on a doorstep holding a folded flag, her belly still swollen with Jonah. Her husband, David, a Marine, her high school sweetheart, her anchor, was declared missing in action during a mission overseas. There were no final words, no goodbye kiss, no certainty. Just silence and pain. But Sarah didn't crumble. She wiped her tears, went back to work, and raised her babies with fierce devotion. She taught Sunday school on weekends, clipped coupons like scripture, and whispered bedtime prayers that always ended the same way: God, wherever he is, keep him safe, and if it's your will, bring him home. Still, the world moved on. People stopped asking. Even hope faded into routine. Until this morning. As Sarah walked to the mailbox after the children had run off to play, she didn't expect anything more than bills and catalogs. But nestled between them was a single envelope, weathered, hand-addressed, and postmarked from a military base she hadn't thought about in years. She froze. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat as her fingers trembled around the edges of the letter. 10 years of questions. 10 years of prayers. 10 years of holding it all together. Could it be him? Her heart pounded like a war drum, echoing the weight of years carried alone. She looked back at the house, her children laughing inside, their drawings still pinned to the fridge, their lives built on the foundation she laid stone by stone, sacrifice by sacrifice. Whatever was inside that envelope, Sarah knew, life would never be the same. This is the story of a mother's unshakable faith. A family bound by love stronger than grief. And the letter that would rewrite everything they thought they knew. Stay with us, because what happens next will touch your heart in ways you'll never forget. The sky over Maple Ridge, Indiana, was brushed in pale peach and lavender as the sun slowly crept above the horizon. A spring breeze rustled the tulips lining the front porch of a small white house with green shutters, the Whitaker home. Inside, the house was already awake, though one of its occupants still lay beneath a quilt of soft pastels in the master bedroom. Sarah Whitaker stirred only slightly when the bedroom door creaked open. She smiled faintly, pretending to sleep, as her children tiptoed inside, Ellie, 11, and Jonah, 10, carrying a breakfast tray with toast, scrambled eggs, and a lopsided pancake in the shape of a heart. "Shh, she's still asleep," Ellie whispered, balancing the tray while Jonah clutched 2 handmade cards taped with wildflower petals. "Mom," Jonah whispered louder, unable to contain himself. "Happy Mother's Day." Sarah opened her eyes, laughter catching in her throat. "Oh my goodness. Did you two make this?" Ellie beamed. "We did it all ourselves. No help from Aunt Lila this year." Sarah sat up, her robe slipping from one shoulder, revealing a neckline worn from years of early mornings. She took the tray and glanced at the crooked pancake, heart swelling. "It's perfect." Mother's Day had always been bittersweet for Sarah. The kind of day that reminded her of what she had and what she'd lost. But she never let the sorrow show. Not when these 2 bright, breathing miracles stood in front of her, grinning with syrup-stained fingers. After breakfast, they cuddled on the couch watching old cartoons, Jonah curled against her side while Ellie braided her hair like she used to when she was little. A few hours later, Sarah stepped outside for her usual walk to the mailbox, barefoot, as always, in the dewy grass. Bills. Flyers. A church bulletin from St. Paul's. And one more thing. An envelope. Handwritten. No return address. She almost dropped it when she saw the handwriting. Neat. Block letters. Familiar. She stared at it for a long moment, her fingers trembling, her breath suddenly short. It couldn't be. Not after 10 years. She turned it over. No name. Just a postmark from Camp Lejeune. Her throat closed. The envelope was aged, creased as if it had been handled many times before being sent. Her pulse quickened as she clutched it in both hands and walked slowly back to the house, each step feeling like 1,000. Inside, the kids were still on the couch, now arguing about what to watch next. Sarah slipped the envelope into the pocket of her cardigan, heart pounding. She wasn't ready. Not yet. She needed to breathe. Think. Pray. Later that night, when the kids were asleep and the quiet returned, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, hands folded over the envelope. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, as if urging her on. She took a deep breath. Then, the front door creaked. She stood abruptly, heart racing. But there was nothing. Just the wind through the cracked window. She turned back to the envelope, slowly sliding her finger under the seal. The paper inside was thin and yellowing, like it had been waiting for too long. Sarah unfolded it slowly, every crease feeling like a scar across time. Her eyes scanned the words, hesitant, unsure, until they landed on the name at the bottom. David. Her husband. The man they said was gone. Presumed dead. The man she had buried in her heart, but never in the ground. The first words were a whisper of a life long silenced. If you're reading this, then somehow, by God's mercy, it found its way to you. Her fingers trembled. A tear rolled down her cheek, silent and warm. David's letter was dated nearly 3 years ago. He wrote from a military hospital overseas. The details were vague. He said he had suffered head trauma, memory loss, and later, deep isolation in a refugee village near the border of Syria. It wasn't until months after he regained fragments of memory that he began to write. Every time he tried to send a letter, bureaucracy and confusion got in the way. But this one had somehow escaped the system. I don't even know if you've moved. If you remarried. If our babies are okay. I don't even know if I have the right to write. But I had to try, Sarah. I had to. Sarah gripped the table as the wave hit her. Not a wave of grief. Not even of hope. Just shock. Stillness. Like the air had been pulled out of the room. Her mind spiraled. Why now? Why this letter? Why today of all days? The letter didn't say where he was now, just that he was trying to make it back. That he would keep trying. That he loved her. Always had. She wiped her eyes and read the letter again. And again. The house creaked in the silence. On the fridge, a photo of David in uniform stared back at her, the edges curled from age. Jonah had never met him. Ellie remembered only his voice on the phone. She pressed the letter to her chest. God, what are you doing? She whispered. There was no answer. Only the wind. And in the darkness, she picked up her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Aunt Lila? I need you to come over. Something's happened. Aunt Lila arrived within 15 minutes, wearing her pink house slippers and a sweatshirt that read faith over fear. She didn't ask questions as she stepped through the front door. She just looked at Sarah's face, then took her gently by the hand and guided her into the kitchen. Sarah slid the letter across the table. Lila adjusted her reading glasses and began reading, her lips moving slightly as she whispered the words. Halfway through, she stopped, placed her hand over her mouth, and closed her eyes. Lord have mercy, she murmured. It's him. Sarah nodded. It's David. They sat in silence for a moment, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Sarah whispered, What do I do with this? Lila reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. You pray. And you wait. And you trust that if God brought this letter into your hands on today of all days, then he's not finished with this story. Sarah exhaled, feeling some of the tightness in her chest loosen. Lila was right, she usually was. But that didn't make it any easier. I feel like I'm betraying everything I've built since he was gone. The kids. Our life. What if he's not the man I remember? You don't have to decide anything tonight, Lila said gently. Let the Lord lead. Let your heart catch up. That night, after Lila left, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. She remembered David's laugh. The way he used to cradle Ellie like a treasure. The smell of cedar and aftershave when he hugged her goodbye before deployment, but that was a lifetime ago. The next morning, while the kids were still asleep, she searched online for any mention of him, news articles, military records, obituaries. There was nothing recent. But she did find something, a veterans advocacy page with a forum. Buried in the comments of a 6-month-old thread was a post that stopped her breath. Looking for Sarah Whitaker of Maple Ridge. If anyone knows her, please help me reach her. David W. Her heart nearly exploded in her chest. She replied quickly, hands shaking, This is Sarah. I got your letter. She stared at the screen. Would he see it? Would he reply? 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Nothing. She turned off the computer, fighting the rising tide of anxiety. But she had taken the first step. The sun was rising again, casting pale gold light through the kitchen windows as Sarah sat at the table with her third cup of lukewarm coffee. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of wood and the distant hum of a lawnmower a few blocks away. The kids were still asleep, unaware that the world beneath their feet had shifted. She stared at the printed form page again. The post was still there, her reply still visible, but no response. She reached for David's letter and unfolded it for the dozenth time. Her eyes didn't even need to scan the words now, they were burned into her memory. But her fingers traced the ink, the curves of his letters, the slight smudge where his hand must have rested against the page. The handwriting. It was unmistakable. Years ago, she had saved every note he'd left on the fridge, every sticky note tucked into her Bible before deployment. David always printed in neat, deliberate block letters, a habit he'd picked up in basic training. She still had one inside the back cover of her old journal. She pulled it from the shelf now, her fingers trembling slightly, and flipped to the page. You are stronger than you know. I love you. D. She held the note next to the letter. Identical. Tears welled in her eyes. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a cruel prank. This was him. By the time Jonah stumbled into the kitchen in his pajamas, hair tousled and yawning, Sarah had composed herself. Morning, sweetheart, she said, ruffling his hair. He squinted at her. Why are you up so early? Did you sleep? Not much. He grabbed a banana from the counter and climbed onto the stool. You look happy? She smiled softly. Do I? Yeah. You were crying yesterday. Today you look different. She bit her lip and turned away, busying herself with the coffee pot. Well, sometimes God gives us something unexpected. And sometimes it changes everything. Jonah munched quietly, clearly thinking, then asked, like a miracle? She turned back around, tears pooling again. Maybe exactly that. After the kids left for school, Sarah sat again at the computer. She couldn't just wait. Not anymore. She scoured every veteran registry, combed message boards, emailed moderators. She called the Department of Veterans Affairs, then St. Paul's Church to ask if they'd heard from any outreach organizations lately. She even left a message at the local VA hospital. That evening, while Ellie worked on a school project in the living room and Jonah played with Legos on the floor, Sarah opened her email. There it was. A new message. Sarah. It's me. Her breath caught. Her hand hovered over the mouse. She clicked, greater than Sarah. Greater than I didn't know if you'd answer. I've been trying to find a way to reach you since the day they let me out. I didn't know if you'd still be in Maple Ridge, if you'd moved on, if I should even write. Greater than, but I had to. Every day, I woke up praying that you and the kids were safe. That you were happy. That somehow, you still believed in me. Greater than I'm not the same man I was. A lot has changed. But I need to see you. If only once. To say I'm sorry. To say I never stopped loving you. Greater than I'll be in Indiana next week. I'll understand if you don't want to see me. Greater than, but if there's even a part of you that still remembers us, please meet me. Greater than I'll be at the old train station. Friday, 3 p.m. Greater than always yours. Greater than David. Sarah read it once. Then again, her fingers moved to reply. Then paused. In the next room, Jonah laughed. Ellie hummed a praise song softly under her breath. What would she tell them? How would she prepare them for this? She stood slowly, gripping the edges of the counter to steady herself. She had 4 days. And 1,000 memories to sift through. The next morning came with a weight Sarah hadn't felt in years. The sky was overcast, a soft gray stretching over Maple Ridge like a wool blanket, casting everything in muted light. As she packed lunches and reminded Jonah to put on matching socks, her thoughts drifted to the old train station. Friday, 3 p.m. just 4 days away. It felt like a storm was building inside her, one she couldn't run from, one she wasn't sure she wanted to. After the kids left for school, Sarah stood alone in the hallway, staring at the old photo wall. There were snapshots from birthdays, church picnics, and holidays, smiles that masked exhaustion, joy stitched together with faith and sheer willpower. But in the center, framed in weathered oak, was the last family photo they took before David deployed. Ellie was just a baby in David's arms, and Sarah could barely recognize the young woman she had been, full of hope and untested love. David had one arm around her shoulder, his face slightly turned toward her as if mid-laugh. The frame was dusty. She reached up and wiped it clean. Did you ever think this would happen? She whispered. She didn't expect an answer. But deep down, something stirred. A thread of faith that had never quite broken. That afternoon, she called her pastor, Reverend Thompson. His voice was calm and grounding, like it had been every Sunday since David's disappearance. "I don't know what to do," Sarah admitted. "Part of me wants to run to him. Another part wants to lock the door and pretend the letter never came. Both of those feelings are human," Reverend Thompson said gently. "But neither of them is rooted in fearlessness. The question is, what would love do?" Sarah was quiet. "Love waits when it needs to," he continued. "But love also shows up. Just like Christ showed up. Even after we thought all hope was gone." After the call, she pulled out the box from the back of her closet. Inside were the pieces she hadn't allowed herself to touch in years: David's letters from boot camp, his favorite flannel shirt, the dog tag she had clutched through nights of tears. She unfolded the shirt and pressed it to her face. It still smelled faintly like him. That night, she told Ellie first, they were sitting on the edge of the bed, braiding each other's hair, like they used to when Ellie was little. Sarah's voice trembled as she explained. Ellie didn't cry. She just sat quietly, absorbing the truth. "So, he's alive," Ellie said softly. Sarah nodded. "And you might see him again." Another nod. Ellie looked away for a moment. Then back at her mom. "Do you still love him?" Sarah hesitated. "I never stopped. But I also didn't expect to get this chance again." Ellie leaned her head on Sarah's shoulder. "If he's who he says he is, I want to meet him." Later, Sarah sat at the kitchen table again, alone, David's email still open on the screen. She typed slowly. "Greater than I'll be there. Friday. 3 p.m. Sarah." She pressed send. A reply came less than a minute later. "Greater than thank you. I'll be waiting." The next morning, Sarah woke to a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man in uniform, not David, but a friend from the old base. He handed her a folded letter, saluted, and walked away without another word. She opened it slowly. Inside was another message. Handwritten. Familiar. Greater than, in case I never got the chance to say it out loud. "Thank you for raising them. For holding on. For believing, even when I couldn't." She held it to her chest. The days passed quickly after that. Thursday night came with restless sleep and vivid dreams. Friday morning broke clear and blue, the first time the sun had returned all week. At 2:30, Sarah stood at the mirror in her bedroom, hands trembling slightly as she pinned her hair back. She wore a soft blue blouse and the silver cross necklace David had given her on their 5th anniversary. She walked past the photo wall one more time, touching the frame gently. Jonah and Ellie were waiting with Aunt Lila, who gave her a knowing look but said nothing. As Sarah stepped outside, a warm breeze lifted the hem of her blouse. She got into the car and headed for the train station. Maple Ridge's old train station stood like a memory itself, quiet, sun-warmed bricks chipped with time, and ivy creeping up the sides as if nature was trying to hold on to it. The last renovation had been a decade ago, but the charm remained. A wooden bench sat beneath a faded timetable sign, and the air smelled of wildflowers and distant iron. Sarah's car pulled into the gravel lot at 2:52 p.m. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. She stepped out slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse, her hands clammy despite the warm spring air. She scanned the platform. Empty. Except for a few travelers and a boy playing with a toy airplane near a vending machine, there was no sign of David. She checked her phone. No new messages. 2:56. She sat on the bench, trying to breathe, eyes fixed on the bend in the tracks. The train was due at 3 o'clock. As the minutes stretched, her memories rushed in like a flood. Their first kiss under the church awning during a thunderstorm. The night she told him she was pregnant with Ellie. The last time she saw him at the base, holding onto her hand like he never wanted to let go. Then the grief. The knock on the door. The uniformed officer. The word she barely remembered hearing, presumed dead in action. A whistle cut through her thoughts. She stood, suddenly breathless. The train emerged from around the bend, steel glinting in the sun, rumbling closer with every heartbeat. People stirred. A mother lifted her toddler. A man with a guitar case stepped forward. The brakes screeched lightly as the train hissed to a stop. The doors opened. One by one, passengers stepped out. A woman with a suitcase. A college student in earbuds. An elderly man with a cane. And then, a figure in uniform. His hair was more silver than she remembered. He moved slower. A faint limp in his left leg. But the way he looked around, scanning, hoping. It was him. David. He spotted her. His breath caught. Sarah didn't move at first. Her body locked with emotion, relief, disbelief, fear, hope, all converging at once. But then her feet began to carry her forward. He stepped toward her. "Sarah," he said. His voice was cracked and low, like it hadn't been used in too long. She reached out. His hand met hers. Neither said anything more. Not yet. The air between them was too thick with things that had no words. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "You came," she whispered. "I promised I would," he said, voice trembling. They stood there, holding each other's hands, time folding in on itself. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photo, their wedding picture. The edges curled, just like the one on her fridge. He held it between them. "I've carried this with me every day." The platform around them blurred. The sun broke through the clouds. She took a deep breath. And for the first time in 10 years, Sarah Whitaker felt like she could breathe again. The ride back from the train station was quiet. Sarah kept glancing sideways, not out of doubt, but out of wonder, as if David might vanish if she looked away too long. He sat beside her in the passenger seat, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward her, like he couldn't believe it either. The house came into view around the bend, and David let out a slow breath. "It hasn't changed much," he said softly. "No," Sarah replied, pulling into the gravel driveway. "But everything else has." Inside, Ellie and Jonah waited nervously in the living room with Aunt Lila. Jonah clutched his well-worn stuffed dinosaur, pacing back and forth. Ellie sat still, but her foot tapped anxiously. When the front door opened, both children looked up. David stepped in, cautiously. He removed his cap, his eyes scanning every detail, pictures on the wall, the smell of baked cinnamon, the faint creak of the old floorboard near the entry. Ellie was the first to stand. Her eyes were wide and unreadable. "Hi," she said. David's voice cracked. "Hi, Ellie." It wasn't much, but it was enough. She stepped closer. "I remember your voice. From the recordings you sent. I remember holding you," he said. "You were so small. You fell asleep on my chest the night before I deployed." A long silence passed. Then Ellie walked forward and hugged him. It was hesitant at first, then strong. David blinked hard, holding her gently, like he was afraid she might shatter. Jonah stepped closer, still clinging to his dinosaur. "Are you really him?" he asked. David knelt. "I'm your dad. I never wanted to leave you." Jonah looked at Sarah. She nodded. "It's okay." Jonah moved forward slowly. Then all at once, he flung his arms around David's neck. They stayed like that a long time. And Lila wiped tears from her eyes, stepping quietly into the kitchen. Later that night, they sat around the dinner table for the first time as a whole family, awkward, quiet, unsure of what to say, but together. Sarah had made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, David's favorite. David reached for Jonah's hand to say grace, just like he used to. "Lord, thank you for bringing me home. Thank you for the strength you gave Sarah. And thank you for these beautiful children. Help us to walk forward with faith, forgiveness, and love." "Amen," they all whispered. That night, when the kids were asleep, Sarah and David sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies flicker in the dark. A warm breeze rustled the trees. "I thought about you every day," David said. "Even when I didn't know my name, I remembered your face." Sarah looked at him, eyes soft. "There were nights I thought I saw you in dreams. Maybe it was God reminding me not to forget." David leaned back, eyes closed. "There's so much I want to tell you. But I don't know where to start." "Start with being here," Sarah whispered. "We'll take it one day at a time." The porch creaked gently beneath them. The stars above were silent, but somehow, everything spoke. The room was dim, its only light a single desk lamp that cast a soft halo on the modest furnishings. Sarah sat rigid in a chair in the corner of the VA hospital room, hands clasped tightly in her lap. It was quiet, eerily so, except for the faint rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and the gentle hum of a wall-mounted heater. David sat across from her in a wheelchair, his posture slightly hunched, his eyes lost in some distant place. He looked older than she remembered, more than just 10 years older. His face was lined, not just with age, but with grief. His beard was peppered with gray, and his left hand trembled ever so slightly. Sarah had spoken first, hours ago when she arrived. A quiet hi, followed by stunned silence. And then tears, hers, not his. "I wasn't sure you were real," she whispered now, breaking the stillness. David looked up. "I'm not sure I am either." She searched his face for the man she had loved, the man she'd mourned. The softness in his eyes was still there, but it was buried beneath layers of pain, things she could only begin to guess at. They told me you died. Her voice cracked. I held your dog tags. There was a ceremony. I know, he said softly. They didn't know what else to tell you. David leaned back slowly in his chair. It was chaos. We were ambushed. I blacked out. They must have thought I was gone. But I woke up later, somehow pulled from the wreckage. Locals took me in. I had nothing. No ID, no memory. For a long time, I didn't even know my own name. Sarah pressed her fingers to her lips, tears slipping down her cheeks. I prayed for you every day, she whispered. David looked down. I didn't remember you until almost a year after I was brought to the aid station. By then, it was too late. I'd been declared Kia. My unit. They'd moved on. I wrote letters, but no one believed me. It was like screaming into a void. Sarah exhaled slowly. Then how did you find me? He gave her a small, weary smile. God. And a nurse named Mateo who refused to give up. They sat in silence again. I've missed so much, David said at last. Ellie, Jonah. I never even held him. No, she said gently, you didn't. But he knows about you. I never stopped talking about you. I just didn't know how to explain why you weren't here. David's voice was a whisper. Do they hate me? Sarah shook her head. They're scared. Confused. But they don't hate you. They want to know who you are. He nodded, swallowing hard. I want to know who I am too. And then, a silence fell between them, gentle, like the quiet between ocean waves. You're not who you were, Sarah said finally. But neither am I. We've both lived lifetimes since then. David reached for the letter on the table, the same one she had brought with her, the one he wrote years ago. His fingers traced the edges. I was afraid to hope, he admitted. Afraid you'd moved on. That you'd hate me. Sarah's eyes welled again. You don't get to disappear and come back without breaking a few things, David. But hate you? No. I never could. The door opened gently. A nurse peeked in. Mr. Whitaker? Time for your meds. David nodded. Sarah stood, placing a hand briefly over his. I'll come back tomorrow. And the day after, if you want me to. He met her eyes, as that once felt like home. Please do. She gave him a soft smile. There's a lot you've missed. But we've still got time. As she stepped into the hallway, the weight of the moment pressed on her chest, grief, wonder, confusion, love. All tangled into one. Back in the room, David whispered a prayer he hadn't said in years. God. Thank you. Don't let me mess this up. The minivan rumbled quietly as it pulled into the long VA parking lot, the early spring wind brushing gently against its sides. Sarah sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel even after the engine stopped. Beside her, Jonah fidgeted with the sleeves of his hoodie while Ellie stared silently out the window, her earbuds in but not playing anything. They had all agreed to this. They had talked about it for days, prayed about it at night, read David's letter together again and again. But no amount of preparation could truly ready them for what was about to happen. Jonah glanced up at his mother. Are you scared? Sarah turned and smiled softly. No. Nervous, maybe. But not scared. Ellie pulled one earbud out. Is he going to look the same? Sarah sighed. Not exactly. He's been through a lot. We all have. Jonah's voice was small. What if he doesn't like us? Sarah reached over, resting her hand on his knee. He will. You're his son. And you, Ellie. You're the best parts of him and me. He's going to love you both. He already does. They walked through the lobby together, past rows of waiting chairs and faded posters about PTSD and veteran resources. Sarah had called ahead. Room 203. North Wing. As they approached, Sarah could feel her heart pounding harder with each step. Jonah's hand had slipped into hers. Ellie walked a step behind, quiet but steady. David was sitting up in his wheelchair when they entered. His eyes immediately locked on Sarah, then shifted, slowly, to the two children beside her. He didn't speak right away. Neither did they. Jonah stared at the man in front of him, trying to make sense of it. This was the face from the photos on the fireplace. This was the man whose folded flag sat in their attic. He looked like the pictures, but heavier somehow, with more pain in his eyes and a body that moved a little slower. Hi, Jonah said softly. David's voice cracked. Hi. Ellie stepped forward. I remember your voice. You used to call me Ellie Bug. David smiled, tears already welling. I still do. In my head. Every day. A long silence followed, painful, awkward, sacred. Then, slowly, Jonah stepped forward and held out a small drawing. It was crude and colorful, a stick figure of a man in uniform, holding hands with a boy and a girl. Above them, the words "Still our dad" were scrawled in blocky letters. David took the picture with trembling hands. A tear slid down his cheek. I don't deserve this, he whispered. Sarah stepped behind the children, her voice quiet but firm. You don't have to deserve it. You just have to show up. Ellie stepped closer, her arms crossed. I'm not sure how I feel yet. That's okay, David said. You don't have to decide today. Jonah, ever the soft-hearted one, stepped close enough for David to touch. Do you want to play chess sometime? Mom taught me. I'm not very good. David let out a soft laugh. I'd love that. Sarah sat down at the edge of the bed, relief washing over her in waves. It was awkward. Imperfect. But it was happening. They talked for almost an hour. Mostly about small things. School. Baseball. Ellie's violin lessons. David asked questions and listened carefully. Every once in a while, he reached up to wipe his face, overwhelmed by the simple act of hearing their voices. When visiting hours ended, a nurse gently reminded them. Sarah rose, pulling on her jacket. We'll be back, she said. Tomorrow. David nodded. Take your time. I'll be here. Ellie lingered for a second, then stepped forward and hugged him quickly, almost stiffly. Jonah wrapped both arms around his father's chest, holding on longer. When they stepped out into the hallway, Sarah paused to look back. Spring deepened in Maple Ridge, Indiana. Trees bloomed, birds returned to the morning sky, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt like something buried deep within her was slowly beginning to thaw. David had been moved from the VA hospital to a long-term rehab center closer to town. His memory, though fragmented, was sharpening with each passing week. He still limped heavily, and some days he forgot the simplest details, like whether he'd eaten lunch or how old Jonah was, but when he laughed, it was the same laugh. And when he said her name, it still held warmth. Sarah had started visiting every afternoon. Sometimes with the kids. Sometimes alone. On this particular Wednesday, she brought a photo album. One of the older ones, faded and bulky with too many pages, the kind she hadn't opened since before the funeral. David sat on the porch of the facility wrapped in a light blanket, the late afternoon sun soft on his face. He looked up as she approached, smiling in that quiet, uncertain way he'd adopted since coming back. What's this? He asked, as she set the album in his lap. A time machine, she said with a gentle grin. They flipped through the first few pages in silence. There they were, barely in their 20s, standing outside their first apartment with a just married banner taped sloppily above the door. David chuckled. I forgot how ugly that couch was, and how proud you were of it, Sarah added. You set the plaid added character. Next came Ellie as a baby, wrapped in a pink blanket, her eyes shut tight, mouth open mid-scream. She never liked naps, David said, surprising them both. Sarah turned to look at him, eyes wide. You remember that? He nodded slowly. Just a flash. But yeah. I remember holding her during one of your night shifts. I walked the hallway for hours. My arms were sore for 2 days. Sarah blinked back tears. You never told me that. He smiled, the memory settling in like a stone dropped into a still lake. As they flipped deeper, the photos blurred into years of holidays, birthdays, lazy Sundays in the backyard. Sarah narrated gently where they were, what had changed, who had visited. David listened, absorbing every detail like a starving man. Then they turned a page, and the mood shifted. It was the last picture of him and Ellie before deployment. She was 3, sitting on his shoulders, grinning with a missing tooth. David stared at it for a long time. I don't remember this one, he whispered. You left the next day, Sarah said softly. He nodded, biting his lip. I thought I'd be back before her next birthday. The page after that was empty, just a sleeve with no photo. Sarah's hand lingered there. I stopped putting pictures in after the funeral, she said. It felt wrong. Like I was writing a new story without the first chapter. David looked down at his lap, his voice low. I missed everything. You missed a lot, she said honestly. But not everything. They sat in silence for a moment. I used to dream about you, Sarah added. Not every night. But sometimes. You were always just out of reach. standing on the porch or driving past in a truck. I'd wake up crying. I'm sorry, he whispered. She touched his arm. I don't tell you that to make you feel guilty. I tell you because even when the world said you were gone, my heart refused to believe it. David's throat tightened. I wish I could go back. Do it over. Fix it. You can't, Sarah said gently. But maybe. We can build something new. Something real. Even if it looks different than we imagined. He looked at her, really looked, and for a second, he wasn't the broken man in a wheelchair with a tangled past. He was just David. Her David. I still love you, he said, voice trembling. Sarah closed the album. Her heart was pounding. I never stopped. Tears spilled over, and this time neither of them tried to hide them. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. For a moment, the past and present blurred, and all that remained was love, gritty, scarred, weathered love that had survived fire and time and silence. Inside the building, a nurse called out for dinner, breaking the spell. Sarah smiled, wiping her eyes. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll be here, David said. As she walked away, he opened the album again. His fingers lingered on that last photo with Ellie. And for the first time in 10 years, he remembered the sound of her laugh. The morning sun filtered gently through the kitchen windows, warming the worn wooden table where Jonah sat eating cereal, half asleep, and Ellie scrolled through her phone, earbuds dangling from one ear. Sarah stood by the stove, scrambling eggs, but her eyes kept drifting toward the calendar on the wall. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since David re-entered their lives. 3 weeks of hospital visits, awkward silences, quiet tears, and slow, careful steps towards something none of them had the words for yet. It was Jonah who said it first, without ceremony, between bites of toast. Can he come live with us? Sarah paused, spatula midair. Ellie looked up, startled. What? Jonah shrugged. He's our dad. We've been visiting him every day. I don't like leaving him there. It's weird. Ellie rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Not outright. Sarah set the pan aside and sat down slowly. That's a big question. But don't you think we're kind of a family again? Jonah asked. I mean, not the same as before. But close? Sarah reached for his hand. We're figuring that out. Together. It's going to take time. Later that afternoon, Sarah brought it up with David. They sat on a bench near the center's garden, daffodils and tulips in bloom around them. The wind rustled the chimes that hung from the oak trees, soft and melodic. You know, Sarah said, Jonah asked me something today. David glanced over. Yeah? He wants to know if you're coming home. David froze, his eyes falling to the gravel at their feet. I don't know if that's even possible, he said after a moment. Not like before. I'm not the man you married. I can barely make it upstairs. I need therapy. I have flashbacks. I'm broken. Sarah's voice was steady. So am I, just in different ways. He looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. You sure you want me there? Like this? I'm not asking the man from 10 years ago to walk back through the door, she said. I'm asking the man sitting beside me now. The one who's fought to come home. The one who remembered the sound of Ellie's laugh. The one Jonah asks about every morning. David blinked hard, emotion choking his voice. What if I can't be the father they need? You be the father you are, Sarah replied. That's enough. By the end of the week, a social worker and a VA counselor had helped make arrangements for an in-home care setup. David would need a downstairs room, some medical equipment, and ongoing outpatient rehab, but it was doable. Hard, but doable. The community stepped in. Members from St. Paul's showed up with casseroles, a local carpenter built a ramp over their porch steps, and Ellie's best friend's father rewired the bedroom to accommodate medical outlets. Sarah watched it all unfold with quiet amazement. Love was a funny thing, it didn't always arrive with flowers or grand gestures. Sometimes it showed up in the form of a stranger hammering nails, or a casserole in a foil tray, or a hesitant teenage girl sweeping dust out of the room that would become her father's new space. On the morning of David's homecoming, Sarah stood at the door in a faded yellow dress, the same one she wore the day he left for deployment. The VA van pulled up slowly. The door opened. Jonah ran ahead, waving wildly. David stepped out with help from a nurse, bracing himself on crutches. His face looked pale, worn, but alive. Present. Home. He stepped toward the porch, saw the new ramp, the welcome sign Ellie had painted, the yellow tulips in the flower beds. Sarah met him halfway. Welcome home, she whispered. David swallowed hard. I don't know what I did to deserve this. You came back, she said. That's enough. Behind her, Ellie stood on the porch. Her arms crossed, but this time, she was smiling. And inside, the old house, once filled with absence, felt full again. The house was quiet that evening. Not the silence of absence, the kind Sarah had lived with for 10 years, but the quiet that comes after a storm, when the winds have settled and the world holds its breath, waiting to see what comes next. David had been home for 5 days. The ramp had creaked under the wheels of his chair that first morning. Jonah had given a grand tour of every corner of the house, narrating like a game show host. Sarah had watched it all, her heart tugged between joy and the aching uncertainty of what lay ahead. But Ellie had remained guarded. She had smiled at David's homecoming. She helped set up his room. She even cooked dinner one night, spaghetti and garlic bread, just like he used to make. But her eyes never lingered on him for long, and she hadn't called him Dad. That night, after Jonah had gone to bed and the dishes were drying in the rack, Sarah found her daughter sitting alone in the backyard, hoodie pulled over her knees, face to the sky. She stepped outside, wrapping a blanket around her own shoulders. You okay? She asked softly. Ellie nodded, then shrugged. I guess. Sarah sat beside her, waiting. After a long moment, Ellie said, It's just weird, you know? Everyone's acting like this is a movie with a happy ending. But I don't even remember what he smelled like. Or how his voice sounded when he wasn't in a hospital bed. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, you were only 3 when he left. But he remembered you. Every day, Ellie. He carried a picture of you in his helmet. Ellie's jaw tightened. He still left. He didn't want to, Sarah said gently. War isn't about wanting. Ellie shook her head. You don't get it, Mom. I needed him. When I had panic attacks in middle school. When I got bullied. When I hit puberty and didn't know who I was. You were there. But he wasn't. And now he just gets to be here again? Just like that? Sarah took her hand. No, sweetheart. It's not just like that. This, she gestured around them, to the porch light, to the quiet hum of the world they built. This is hard. Forgiveness is hard. Loving someone who hurt you, even when they didn't mean to, that's even harder. Ellie blinked fast. I know you're angry, Sarah continued. And you have every right to be. But don't let that anger close the door on something that could become beautiful. They sat in silence, the wind rustling the leaves above them. Inside, David stared at a family photo, one taken just a day ago. He was in it now. A man returned. But his eyes lingered on Ellie's face, her forced smile. He could feel the weight of her distance. The next morning, when Ellie came downstairs, she found a small box on the table with her name written in block letters. Inside was an old bracelet. Worn, handmade. A blue thread woven around a shell. She remembered it faintly, something she had made in preschool. Underneath it was a note in shaky handwriting. Greater than I don't have the right words. I don't have the right to ask you for anything. Greater than but I kept this with me. Through everything. Greater than because I never stopped being your dad. Greater than David. Ellie stared at the bracelet for a long time. Then she slipped it on. And for the first time since he came home, she opened the door to his room. Can we talk? She asked, voice quiet. David looked up, startled. Of course. She stepped in, sat down on the edge of the bed. I'm still mad at you, she said plainly. David nodded, swallowing. That's okay. But I want to understand. I want to know who you are now. And who you were. David's eyes filled. I'd like that more than anything. And as they talked, tentatively, awkwardly, but honestly, something shifted. Not healed. Not yet. But mending. Piece by fragile piece. Late summer in Maple Ridge brought the kind of evenings that settled into your bones, hazy sunsets, fireflies blinking in the grass, and the distant sound of hymns from open church windows. On the front porch of the Whitaker house, Sarah sat in her rocking chair, Bible open on her lap, though her eyes weren't reading. She was praying. Quietly. Not out loud, just a slow, steady current of thoughts flowing toward heaven. David was asleep inside. His recovery was progressing faster than anyone expected. Physical therapy in the mornings. Short walks by evening. Ellie and he had started playing board games together. Jonah brought him comic books and laid them out on the bed like offerings. Things were better. But Sarah still couldn't rest. She was tired in a way no sleep could fix. Years of surviving on hope and scraped together strength had left a kind of permanent weariness in her soul. And now that David was home, the real questions began to rise, questions she hadn't dared ask in the early days. Who are we now? Can love be rebuilt from ruins? What if he leaves again, not from war, but from fear, or from guilt? What if I can't forgive everything? Behind her, the screen door creaked, and Lila stepped out, setting 2 mugs of tea on the porch railing. She sank into the chair beside Sarah and exhaled. You're out here every night, she said softly. I don't know what else to do, Sarah admitted. I keep thanking God. But I also keep asking him why. Lila smiled gently. That's the thing about prayer. Half of it's gratitude. The other half is grief you haven't named yet. Sarah glanced sideways. You think I'm doing the right thing? You opened your home. Your heart. You let God write a new chapter. That's always the right thing, even when it hurts. Sarah nodded slowly. He still has nightmares, you know. Cries out in his sleep. Sometimes I wonder if we're asking too much of him. Of the kids. Of ourselves. Lila reached over and squeezed her hand. You're not alone anymore. That's the miracle. Inside, David stirred from a restless sleep. The room was dark except for the small lamp by his bed. On the nightstand was his Bible, dusty, pages bookmarked with worn photos and hospital slips. He opened it for the first time in a long time, not to read anything in particular. Just to touch something sacred. Something familiar. His eyes landed on a verse, circled years ago. Greater than he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. David closed his eyes. I'm trying, he whispered. Lord, I'm trying. Meanwhile, upstairs, Ellie lay awake, headphones in her ears, music playing softly. But she wasn't listening. She stared at the ceiling, clutching her bracelet. She didn't tell anyone, but she'd started praying too. Just little things. Please help him get better. Please help me forgive. Please don't let this all fall apart. Jonah, curled under his covers, whispered prayers the way kids do, like secrets to a friend. Thanks for bringing my dad home. And please don't take him again. The Whitaker house, once filled with silence and routine, now pulsed with quiet hope. Not everything was healed. But everyone was reaching. And sometimes, that was all faith needed to work with. The rain started mid-morning, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the roof in a steady rhythm. The kind of rain that made the world feel smaller, quieter. Inside the Whitaker house, it was a day for slippers and soup, for puzzles on the kitchen table and second helpings of cornbread. But for Sarah, the rain brought unease. David had been distant that morning. Not in the way he had been when he first returned, confused, lost, but in a different way. He was retreating. He had skipped breakfast, sat alone during lunch, and now hadn't come out of his room in hours. The closed door at the end of the hallway felt like a wall. Sarah stood in front of it now, hand hovering above the doorknob. She remembered how many years that door had been her own, how she would sit on the other side, holding Jonah as a newborn, praying over bills, whispering stories to a baby Ellie. That room had been her refuge. Her war room. Her grief cave. And now he was behind it. And she didn't know what he was carrying. She knocked, gently. David? No answer. She waited a moment, then slowly opened the door. The room was dim, curtains drawn. David sat in the chair by the window, shoulders hunched, eyes on the rain. He didn't look up. Sarah walked in quietly and sat on the edge of the bed. You didn't eat. I wasn't hungry. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he said, you ever feel like you're in the wrong place? Like you walked into a life that looks like yours, but everything's older, different. Sarah folded her hands. Every day for the first 2 years after they told me you were gone. David's jaw tightened. You got strong. You built something without me. And now I'm just here. You are not just here, she said gently. You're part of this family. You always were. He turned to her, eyes red. Sarah, I can't sleep at night. Not because of the war, because I see what I missed. Jonah's face when he tells me about his favorite superhero and I have no idea who it is. Ellie, God, she's this incredible young woman, and I missed her entire childhood. Sarah stood, walked to him, and knelt beside the chair. You missed a lot, she said honestly. And we missed you. But you're not too late. You're still their father. You're still my husband. He looked down at her, barely breathing. But you have to stop punishing yourself for what you couldn't control, she whispered. That's not your burden to carry anymore. Tears welled in David's eyes, and his voice cracked. I don't know how to forgive myself. Sarah reached up and held his face in her hands. Then let me help you. Let us help you. From the hallway, Ellie stood, listening, unseen but not untouched. She had been bringing laundry down, had paused when she heard her father's voice. She heard the pain in it, the shame, and her mother's steady, unwavering grace. She turned and went back to her room, opened her notebook, and for the first time in years, began writing again. She titled the page, "The Man Who Came Back." That evening, they had dinner together. David came willingly. He held Sarah's hand during the prayer. He complimented Ellie's mashed potatoes and asked Jonah about his comic drawings. And though he still wore sorrow like a second skin, something had cracked open inside him. The door wasn't closed anymore. Not in the hallway. Not in his heart. And later that night, Sarah curled into his side, and for the first time in years, he whispered, "I'm glad I made it home." The leaves had begun to turn by the time the letter came. It was a crisp October morning, sunlight spilling golden over the porch as Sarah made her way to the mailbox. She wasn't expecting anything more than the usual: bills, church flyers, a grocery coupon, but when she opened the box, there it was. A single envelope. Handwritten. From the Department of Defense. She stood still for a long moment, the envelope trembling slightly in her hand. Then she turned and walked back inside. David was sitting at the table with Jonah, helping him glue together a school project made of popsicle sticks and Bible verses. Ellie was on the couch, curled with a book, earbuds in. Sarah walked in and held the envelope out to David. His face tightened as he read the sender. Jonah looked up. "Is that for you, Dad?" David hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, buddy. It is." He waited until after lunch. Until the kids had gone outside. Until the house was quiet again. Then he opened it. Sarah sat beside him. Inside were 3 pages. The first was an official letter, confirmation that, after extensive investigation and delayed record reconciliation, the military now recognized that David Whitaker had been mistakenly declared deceased due to a field error in 2010. The confusion had stemmed from a mix-up of 2 soldiers with similar names and no identifying records on site. The second page was an apology, formal, sterile, but surprisingly heartfelt. The third was a scanned copy of something they had recovered recently. Another letter. Written 10 years ago, a letter David had written before deployment. For Sarah. In case the worst happened. He had given it to his commanding officer, asking that it be mailed if anything went wrong. It never had been. Lost in the fog of war. Now it had found its way home. Sarah unfolded it slowly, the ink faded but still legible. Greater than my dearest Sarah. Greater than. Greater than if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I wanted to come back to you and the kids more than anything in this world. I wanted to watch Ellie grow up and teach Jonah how to tie his shoes. I wanted to sit on our porch and grow old beside you. Greater than. Greater than, but if God had other plans, then I need you to know something. I loved you with everything I had. Every step, every breath, was a prayer that you'd be okay. That you'd find peace. Greater than tell Ellie I sang to her every night I was gone, even if she couldn't hear me. Tell Jonah he was born into love. And tell yourself, when it gets hard, that there was never a second I wasn't with you in spirit. Greater than I'll be waiting on the other side, my love. But I hope, by His grace, that I made it back instead. Greater than forever yours. Greater than David. Sarah couldn't breathe. The letter slid from her fingers as she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. David reached for her. Held her. The two of them folded together in a silent, shaking embrace. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves on the porch. Inside, the echoes of 10 years of sorrow began to fade. The letter had made its journey. And so had they. That night, Ellie added a new photo to the hallway wall. A picture taken just that morning, David, Sarah, Jonah, and herself sitting on the porch steps, arms wrapped around each other, sunlight catching in their smiles. Beneath it, she wrote in cursive. Home isn't just where you begin. It's where love keeps leading you back. And in the quiet hours after the children had gone to sleep, Sarah lit a candle, placed both letters side by side on the table, and whispered a prayer of thanks, not just for what had been returned, but for what had never truly been lost. Love, faith, family, all still here, all still enough. Sometimes, the deepest stories aren't the loudest. They're written in silence, in faith, in the waiting. And this one, Sarah's story, reminds us that even when everything seems lost, God is still working, still weaving, still bringing hearts home. Now we want to hear your story. Has God ever answered a prayer in a way you didn't expect? Or brought something, or someone, back into your life when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments. This space is more than a video, it's a community. And someone reading your words might need the hope they carry. If this story spoke to you, consider subscribing to our channel.